right, we're going to start recording and welcome everybody. We got 58 people attending so far, so that's great. Just excited for everybody to be here with us tonight on this. Uh-oh, what happened? I lost you. There we go. Just excited for everybody to be part of this tonight. This is November 29th. My buddy Tommy Skarlis is with us, and we're going to talk about unlocking fishing patterns. Just welcome to Navionics webinar series. We've been doing this going on 2 years with me. I think it's been going on for a couple of years before that. Just happy to co-host this event and pretty excited. Tommy, I was hoping you were going to bring some of them trophies and show us all those trophies you had.
I figured that would be bragging.
Yeah, that's all right. So just excited for Tommy to be here tonight. We're going to record the webinar so people can view it at a later date on their YouTube channel. Hold your questions to the end. Once Tommy finishes his webinar, I'll come back on and we'll answer your questions as we have time permitting, and we'll try to get this to go about an hour. Hey, that's enough of that. Look at that Ranger thing. You keep doing that, tilting your head down. So, but hey, Tommy, take it away, bud. And then, like I said, we got this idea just from your win. So you want to start on talking about that? That was so exciting for you, I know.
Okay. Well, we'll get rolling here. This is the name of the webinar is Navionics, the key to unlocking fishing patterns. And get everything adjusted here. This is a fairly new webinar. I got to figure out how to move this around. I've got a screen view here. Okay, there we go. Now we're cooking with gas. What I'm going to basically tear down or share with y'all is basic patterns with Navionics mapping. I might get into a little teeny bit about sonar. I might get into a little bit about this, that, or the other thing. But, Tom had mentioned about showing off some trophies. I do have a shot here with some trophies. But, what I wanted to make this mostly was just how I use my maps and how I use them to not only win tournaments, but, how you win tournaments is by catching fish. And there may not be a lot of tournament anglers on here. There may not be any, but I know there's a lot of fishermen watching this. And I tell you, this was the key to my career. Proper mapping, identifying patterns, and catching fish, of course, is how you make a living as a professional fisherman. And I'll never forget, I had first got hooked up with Navionics on their pro staff back in the 90s. And I was up at Sault Ste. Marie for a tournament. And I got my first chip. I had it plugged in my unit. I'd heard from somebody that the fish were in humps that topped out at 10 foot of water. And I went to a hump on the map. I thought, man, this is cool. I can avoid all these rock piles. I can avoid knocking my lower unit off of my motor. And I pull up to the hump and I start driving up onto the hump. And all of a sudden, the bottom on my sonar screen started to come up. And I'm like, man, this stuff really works. I thought this is the coolest thing since sliced bread. See a hump, drive over the hump. All of a sudden, you're on it. And it was at that point that, and it was a while ago. It was close to 20 years ago, maybe over that. I'm like, man, this is really going to help my fishing. And little did I know at that time that it was going to make a profound effect on my fishing. And, I'll tell you, I think that it's what, especially in the early days, differentiated me from the other anglers is that I focused on making certain that I had the right maps. And again, that led to back-to-back MWC championships wins. This year was one of them. And also 6 top 3s on the Crappie Masters Trail. I mean, it's basically meant everything. Well, let's get into patterns. And, I've got a picture here of Mike Valentine and Suzette Valentine. They're the owners of the Crappie Masters Tour. And I was talking with Mike about some spots. Mike and I were going to fish a little charity event this year. And he told me, he says, I don't want to hear about your spots. He says, I want to hear about your pattern. And I thought, or your patterns. And I thought, man, this guy and I are going to get along just fine because, patterns is the key. Spots are spots, but when you realize what differentiate that spot and from another spot and why that spot's holding fish, then you can use that pattern to put together that. And I want a pattern that's coming on that's getting hot for a fishing outing or for a tournament. I don't want one that's diminishing. So sometimes it's good to have, 2, 3, 4, or 5 patterns. Sometimes less is more, but I want that pattern that's coming on and one that's getting hot. Here you can see flooded timber. Mike and I were going to be fishing on Truman Reservoir, and the fish were related to flooded timber. And in fact, as you can see there, you've got a bunch of smaller stobs sticking up out of the water, and they were on bigger timber in this event. They were actually on hedge trees, and just figuring out what that pattern is really important. Identifying the pattern. It also works for ice fishing. Why did I catch fish there? That should be the number one question that goes through your mind whenever you're out and you're fishing is, why did I catch fish there? What's the reason that these fish are in this spot? And that'll help you identify the pattern. Now, years ago, I finally realized that open water fishing, I would use my mapping, I would use a pattern, and then I'd go ice fishing and I'd go brain dead. I'd quit thinking about patterns. I'd quit using patterns. And there was one time I was walking out on the ice in a reservoir here in southern Iowa, and run into a couple old boys out there, and they were fishing by some flooded timber. This isn't my photo, but in any event, I said to them, I says, how's the fish biting? And they said, no, fish ain't biting, but we're probably going to stick around and wait till they swim through again. And I'm thinking to myself, man, instead of waiting for the fish to come to me, I'm going to move and I'm going to get away from these other guys, and I'm going to go find the pattern. At that point, the fish were relating to timber. So I went and found some other timber sticking out of the ice, fished it, nothing. Went and found another chunk of timber sticking out of the ice, fished it, nothing. Finally, I was about ready to quit. I was gonna let that age-old axiom, fish ain't biting, sink into my head, which, I've learned that the fish are always biting. And I saw this little stick up over in a cove, and it was kind of thick, kind of gnarly, but it wasn't very big. And I thought, man, I'm gonna walk all the way over there and waste some more time again. I'm gonna go do it anyway. Walked over, drilled a couple of holes, and literally filled my bucket full of crappies. So you know what? It was basically defining the pattern at that point. And when I realized this brush was in the mouth of a creek cove, it was where deep water met shallow water. Everything else I had been fishing was in shallow water. And so it was at that point that I said to myself, I'm going to go look at the other coves on this body of water and see if this pattern actually exists. And lo and behold, I went to another cove where deep water met shallow water, found some stick ups, fished them, and caught a whole bunch of fish. So, again, going back, mapping is invaluable. Back then when I was ice fishing, we didn't have phone apps. We didn't have mapping, but you look at all the choices we've got nowadays. We've got iPads, we've got iPhones and Androids. So we've got the mobile app that you can actually use on devices, even if you're in somebody else's boat. I've gone fishing with people, and because I've got Navionics on my Android or I've got the mobile app, I've actually got better mapping than just about anybody I go fishing with. And then in turn is you've got Navionics where you can hook it up to your sonar unit here. Down here, it's one where I've actually got a shot of where they've Wi-Fi'd sonar into an iPad from a Raymarine unit. So, you've got that at your ability. You can Wi-Fi this even onto that. And then here we've got the chart viewer over on the website, which I found that chart viewer is invaluable as well. But look at all the choices we've got nowadays for mapping, and it's growing all the time. Navionics offers over 10,000 updates a week. And I want to remind everybody, don't forget when you buy a new Navionics chart to register it and then also update it frequently. Every time I go to a body of water, I try to update my chart. If I'm short on time, I have a laptop that I take with me that's dedicated solely for my Navionics mapping. And I also get some emails on the road with that every once in a while if I have to, but that computer is just basically so I can download my sonar chart or my sonar logs that I've recorded, and it's also for updating frequent updates. So with over 10,000 updates a week, there's times I might be fishing a tournament, and in turn I'll update something that wasn't on there 5 days before when I arrived at that body of water. In order to get signed in or get logged in, the first thing you want to do when you buy a chip is you plug it into your computer, and you want to go and you want to create an account. So under the account tab, you create an account, and this is really easy, you know, and once you've updated that or created that account, you can go to update my chart. Once you've done that, your chart it's pretty easy to do that. Now, when you get there, there's a couple of different things you can do. You can renew the easy way. In other words, if you've got a chart and you want to renew and put new data on that, you can renew that data. You get to 1 year or up to 1 year after you register that card of freshest data. But you can also renew by getting your charts up to date online. And you can also buy updates if you go to the retailer, and you can buy that by over here. You can see the Navionics update, which you're able to purchase there. So there's a multitude of ways to do that. Once you get home and you've plugged that in, you know, before you do that, it'll say chart installer. You're going to want to download the chart installer. If you already have the chart installer, you push launch it. And as you can see here, I plugged my chip in. It says detecting, may take a few moments. And then all of a sudden this screen pops up. Now it's showing me that the unit at the time when I took this photo, I had a Raymarine E127. Now that's changed since then. So you of course can change that, change the unit that you've got if you need to. But it shows Navionics Plus preloaded with US and Canada. Now these come preloaded with Navionics nautical charts, but I want sonar charts so I can also get the recordings that people have done with sonar chart. So in turn is I'm going to check these boxes, and it shows here that nothing's checked so far here. As soon as I check those boxes, here it's going to show me that sonar chart, community edits. It's going to update the entire coverage. It's going to take about 8 minutes. It also shows that I've got 33 sonar logs there that can be downloaded to the site, which helps everybody out. So I've driven around and I've in this instance, I've recorded 33 sonar logs. So I'm going to do this, and it's amazing, especially with fast internet, just how fast I can download an area, just how fast I can change the community edits, how fast I can get sonar charts, and also how fast I can record or download those sonar logs so that enhances or makes the maps better. Now, you can also have sonar on your phone or your tablet. And I've got it on everything. I've got it on every tablet I own. I've got it on every cell phone I own. I even, you know, if I get my son's a new cell phone, I try to download on that. And the new thing that's really cool, and this just blows my mind. I haven't even really hit the tip of the iceberg on this, but now we've got color shading on the apps. And, you know, changing from blue and white shading to now color shading on the apps. Look at what that opens up as far as this map is concerned here. Now you look over here, the red, 0 to 5 foot. These mid depths right here, 6 to 12 foot. And these can be adjusted just by changing these little arrows on the side. Intermediate, deep. So no, you know, let's say your shallow 0 to 2 foot and your mid depth is 3 to 5 foot. You know, you can adjust this and customize this to whatever body of water you're going to. And what's really cool about this fall, if I would have been using this, we had 3 different programs going on Little Beta Knock when we won the championship. Just think what that could have done if I would have been able on those 3 different patterns. One was at 20 to 25 foot of water. We had a bite going on in. Another one was in 40 to 50 foot of water, if I remember correctly. And we had another bite over 50 foot deep. So I could have adjusted all these depths, and all 3 of my patterns would have jumped out in living color with that color shading on the app. So this is something you're definitely going to want to get your head around, and you're going to want to check out that color shading. Now, the biggest thing with electronics is trust your electronics. In other words, the hardest thing for me to learn in my fishing career was to trust my electronics and go figure out how to mark fish first before I started fishing for them. You know, the cornerstone to any pattern is you got to have fish there. And if you're going to fish out of your bathtub, you're not going to catch any fish out of your bathtub. And why? Well, there ain't no fish in your bathtub. So, first we've got to mark fish. And the coolest story I ever heard was one of the pro anglers once hired Bob Propp Sr. to take him fishing. And he wanted to learn how to fish the western reservoirs. And he gets in the boat's kind of cluttered. Bob Propp Sr. is one of the greatest walleye, or was, he's passed away since, God bless him, but one of the greatest walleye anglers in the history of the world. Takes this angler out, they drive around. After 3 hours, the pro angler looked at him and said, "Dude, are we ever going to fish, or are you just taking me for a boat ride?" And he looked at him and he said, "Buddy, we'll fish when we mark some." So about another hour went by, mark, point. All of a sudden, Bob Propp Sr. says, "Okay, drop your lure down in the water." And he leaned over to look at Bob Propp Sr.'s graph, and it was just lit up with fish. In fact, back then it was a flasher, but it was lit up like a Christmas tree. And it was that point on that angler learned how to hunt fish. And from reading all those articles and everything, I learned how to hunt fish. But when I really learned how to trust my graph and mark fish first, sometimes before I fish for fish, that really changed the way that I approach my fishing. So number one is trust your electronics. Force yourself to go out first and mark fish. Now, sometimes you might hit a spot where you're catching fish and you're not marking them. They could be tucked into the boulders. They could be on a sharp break that maybe your sonar's not marking. They could be fins to the mud. But you know what? A lot of times, if you get to looking at your electronics, especially what we've got nowadays, you'll see those fish tight to the belly to the bottom, and it'll make it a whole lot easier. I've got my boat set up right now with my electronics to where I cruise first to find the fish, and I can go up to 40 miles per hour and mark fish. Here shows an instance where we're up on Red Lake, and this is an old chart. This is an old picture, but it's one of my favorite, to where you go out and you just cruise back and forth. And when we mark those fish, all of a sudden we mark them, and we might say, okay, all the fish I'm marking are in 20 foot of water. So that's the starting point of the pattern. Is I've figured out what the depth is. Here, maybe I didn't find them out in the basin. Maybe they're up on the break. They're from 2 foot of water out to 15 foot of water. So I'm going to go back and forth, and all of a sudden I mark a fish here, mark a fish here, and look what all those fish might have in common. They're all on one contour line. So you know what? You're marking fish first, and it's helping you out to establish or to figure out where that's at. And this next slide here, what about no map? Say what? No map? Well, we lead the pack with Navionics. Nobody's got more maps than Navionics, but this is a little lake in Iowa, Ice House Lake. It's never been charted. It's probably a private pond. But you know what? Never fear, because now there's a couple ways you can handle fishing a pond that doesn't have a map. One way is to just fish it. And this is what we used to do in the olden days. I'm going to recommend that if you're just going to fish, in order to establish a pattern, you're probably going to want to do something that covers a lot of water. You might want to troll. Now, if you're a bass fisherman, you might, I know Tom's probably sitting there saying, "Say what?" But I troll a lot when I'm looking for crappies, when I'm looking for walleyes, and while I'm trolling, I'm marking fish. So while you're trolling, you can mark fish, and you've got lures in the water. The best way I've found to do it is to use planer boards. Here I've got 3 offshore planer boards out each side of the boat, and I've just turned my trolling rig from a 2-row picker all the way into a combine. So I'm trolling along, I catch a fish, store a coordinate, look at the depth, look at the speed I was going. Now all of a sudden I'm starting to put together that pattern by using, say, trolling techniques. I don't always troll first to find the fish, but if I've got the pattern established, trolling is a good way to even further expound on that pattern and redefine it. This was an interesting deal. I want to bring up a topic here. If I was a bass angler, and if it was legal to troll in practice, I might even troll to try to compete against other bass anglers. This was a situation where we were down on Kentucky Lake, and we were trolling around for crappies. And behind me in this cove right here, there was a couple of spots along here to where our inside boards started catching some monster bass. And way back in that cove, we trolled around the cove and we went back into it. There was a bass guy back in there, and he gave me the most amount of static I've ever had in my life from another angler about getting in his way because I had out my planer boards. And you know what's funny is if he'd have been nice to me, what I established was the bass that we were catching on our inside planer boards were in 12 to 14 foot of water. And the reason being is I caught a couple of bass and we went into that depth, and I figured out that we were in about 12 to 14 foot of water. They were flats that were setting up in 12 to 14 foot of water. If that dude would have been nice to me, I could have put him on a deep cranking pattern, could have given him the color, could have given him the crankbait, could have given him the depth, and just said, dude, position your boat in 18 foot of water and cast towards the bank with these deep diving crankbaits. We're using 300 bandits at the time. And he would have literally annihilated the fish, but he was mean to me, so I didn't help him out with his bass pattern. But you know what? Here's a situation where sometimes just fishing is a way to establish that pattern. I'd rather have a map. And now with Sonar Chart Live, there are times when I've been on bodies of water where maybe the map wasn't quite as good as it could have been. Maybe the map needed improvement, or maybe I was on a private body of water or a lake that had never been charted. Sonar Chart Live is to record the bottom and watch your map jump out in living color is a blast. And I'm going to run you through here. Here was a body of water where there was a section in that body of water to where it was just as blue as this section is up here. So I went out with Sonar Chart Live and I took a bunch of screenshots, and watch as I go through these screenshots, and I'm moving along. And as I move along with my boat, you can see that it's starting to jump out here in living color. Now this isn't moving as fast as I had anticipated it was going to move. My computer's a little slow. But as you can see there, as I'm moving along, that's actually jumping and recording the bottom as we remove. If you can really speed this up, it's incredibly cool, excuse me, to watch this jump out in living color. So as you can see here, I've got my boat traveling along there. Here it shows that channel where that creek had come through here, where they had a dike across and a bridge. And here that channel's flowing through there. There I just improved it a little bit more. Here's some shallow flats over here. So it's moving along like that right there. And as we cruise along, Sonar Chart Live is actually mapping this body of water out for me and filling that all in. Now, once I get this map established, now I can safely navigate, stay away from the shallow water. I can see where that creek channel flows through. As you can see it over here on the side, here's where you can see that it's starting to show up to where that creek channel came this way. And there might have been like an old oxbow. Here's might have been where the creek channel punched through at a later date. I'm swinging the boat around. And again, I apologize for how slow this is. But, with with big high resolution photos like this, it's going to travel. Now there, I've gone to where I started to show my trail. And as you can see, how I've been driving around and how I've been charting or recording this bottom and improving that map. Now, when you sonar chart like this, you've got the opportunity to where you can take that recording from your chip and download it to Navionics website, and it improves the map for everybody. I encourage you to do that. Now, if you're on one of your hot spots, you don't have to do this, but I get paid to do this. They make me do this. So I give away just about every single living, breathing spot that I was at over the last 10 years by doing sonar recordings or sonar logs when I'm out driving around. Now look at how that keeps improving that creek channel and keeps redefining that creek channel. The more I drive over it, the better it gets. And this is one of the reasons why we can do 10,000 updates or over 2,000 updates a day, is from other anglers doing that. And Shazam, you look at that, there's how that body of water has been improved. Here's a farm pond. And this farm pond right here This may not have any mapping on that, but you know, what I want to address here is when you're going to go out and you're going to fish bodies of water that may not have any mapping, or you're going to go fish intimidating, or a combination of both. Think small. Very important when you're looking at a body of water is to just say to yourself, man, I'm not going to let this body of water intimidate me. I'm going to think smaller. And what a better way to do that than to start when you're learning how to define patterns, to start on smaller bodies of water. I've got 3 patterns here highlighted with these black lines. The one on the bottom by the base of the dam right here, this one right here down along the bottom, that's the deep water. So in the summertime, oftentimes fish move to the deeper water. In the wintertime, they move to that deeper water. More security, it's got more oxygen in it. Sometimes they're there throughout the year. There might be most food there, but that's the deep water pattern. Here's another pattern right here. That's the creek channel. And I've just drawn this line just to kind of give you an idea. Maybe that creek channel flows there. Good way to figure out where the creek channels are at small farm ponds is we always have a buddy stand up on the dike and we look at where that creek channel comes out. So he stands right where that creek channel may be filtering out. Then we look up at the top of that little reservoir where that creek channel may be flowing in. And lo and behold, that's a pretty good idea. Now, you never know. That creek channel may flow over here and cut to this side, may flow back here and cut to this side. But in a lot of instances, it's going to be pretty close to where you see it flowing in on a small body of water to where it's flowing out. And then over here, I've got a point. Looks like there's only one point on this little reservoir, but over here's a flat. I didn't draw that out, but there's a fourth structural element or patternal element, as we might call it. But now all of a sudden you start to see maybe, you know, some patterns jumping out at you on a small scale. On a larger scale, and I should actually reverse this photo, but down here's the dam on a bigger reservoir. And this is Pleasant Creek in Iowa. It's not a very big reservoir, but for Iowa, it's a pretty big body of water. But here you've got the dam. Here you've got the original creek channel flowing down the middle of that. Here you've got apologize for that. You've got another creek channel flowing in here like that. So, you know, you've got a bigger reservoir, but still continue to think small. Look at this reservoir just like we looked at that little farm pond. And for me, that helps to keep it less intimidating whenever I'm looking at that. So now jumping around, I'm going to start going over a bunch of different patterns. I'm not talking about marking or catching fish patterns right now. I'm just talking about mapping patterns that I pay attention to. And a lot of people may think that, man, this is pretty simple. It really isn't that difficult once you start to look at it under these guidelines. Oftentimes, the most important pattern is the hop depth or the hot contour. Here's a pattern right here, a map of Saginaw Bay. And as you can see, this is up in Saginaw Bay, Michigan. You've got deep water here, then you've got the shallower water, and then you've got the shallower water. So as we go from the darker blue to the, I don't know why this is jumping around like this, but as we go from the darker blue to the lighter blue, that's from shallow to deep. And here I've entered some coordinates. All of a sudden I start catching fish. Let's say I might be trolling around. I might be casting up into the shallower water, but here I've got a coordinate here. I've got a coordinate here. I've got a coordinate here. By about the time I get to this coordinate right here, I've already figured out that these fish are relating to this depth contour. Now these might have been established by making trolling passes with the wind. So as I'm moving from shallow to deep, here we can see these trolling passes have all of a sudden started to give off or show off where those fish are at. Now, here's before, here's after. Once you've established that hot depth, you can always move to different areas and check to see if that hot depth truly really is a pattern starting to emerge. So let's say I went over here and I made 3 passes here and bang, 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 I caught 3 fish. Or every time I stored one of these coordinates. Maybe I had a double, maybe I had a triple, but you could see that all of a sudden that, yep. So all of a sudden I get here and I've established that pattern. I've expounded on it. Well, maybe I got crowded. Maybe, people can see a net from 2 miles. They can't see when you need to tow back in from 2 blocks. So I got crowded. I'll move over to here to this part of the lake, and I'll start fishing this depth contour. Now all of a sudden, you can start to see what I mean by following that or chasing that hot depth or hot contour. And that's one of the patterns. Now let's define the hot depth. What did those fish like on this depth right here? Well, they could be there because of transitions. And what I mean by transitions is there could be weed growth wherever this line right here, where this 24 foot of water met 32 foot of water. You can see that this isn't our high def mapping or 1 foot contours. This is a shot of an older map where the contour lines were a little farther spaced out, but they were relating to that sand and mud transition, or maybe a weed growth transition. That weed growth could be there because of sunlight penetration. It could be a transition between sand and mud. But right there might have been a weed growth. That's where that weed edge stops. Now I can primarily go around, or I could go around that reservoir and figure out that weed edge is going to be along that depth everywhere I go. Could be a shoreline lip. If you get a reservoir to where they fluctuate the water, a lot of our reservoirs, or almost all of our reservoirs throughout the United States, were built for watershed management. You get up into Lake Walleye in say, South Dakota is a prime example. There are 3 or 4 or 5 different shoreline lips. What I meant by that is you take this shoreline lip where we were catching our fish before, we're going to pretend that this is the reservoir. And is that in that drought or that low water period, as that water receded, there might have been a 6-inch to 1 foot shoreline lip created from the waves lapping against that shoreline over a period of time. So that shoreline lip develops in that depth. And lo and behold, this could be a shoreline lip from, say, 1994. This could be a shoreline lip from 1998, where the water sat at one depth for a long period of time and established a nice lip. Here could be one from 2006. And again, I'm just speaking hypothetically here, but here could be another shoreline lip from 2012. But what's interesting about this is those contour lines are there for a reason. It's where the depth finder jumped from one mark or one depth to another while they were going around and surveying that lake. And in turn is that could be a shoreline lip once we start to define the hot depth. Another thing to pay attention to is thermoclines. Found at Bull Shoals. I get a lot more data by talking to the divers than I do to the other anglers. If you got an angler down on Bull Shoals that's catching walleyes, he's going to be pretty secretive about it. He's not going to tell you what depth he's catching the fish at or what depth the thermocline may be setting up at. But if you go to the dive shop or one of the dive centers and you talk to the divers there, they spear walleyes. They're fascinated. They really love talking about it. They could tell you, look, this is where these fish are relating to. The thermocline's setting up 18 foot. And I found wherever that thermocline meets 18 foot of water on a hump, you're golden. You're going to find a lot more fish on the humps than you are in the shoreline breaks. So thermocline may be the definition of a hot depth. So now, we're starting to define these. Let's look at some other patterns. I've seen instances before, bass, crappie, walleye, perch, doesn't matter the species, to where these fish are relating to channel swings. And as we go and we look here on this creek channel right here, this is actually a blown up version of a channel on Grenada Lake. And here we've got outside channel swings. Every time that river flowed down and turned back this way here, every time I've got one of these black lines, that's an outside channel swing. Where that water was flowing and all of a sudden it hit that bank and it swung back this way, that reason that water got diverted and that channel got carved the way it did in that reservoir, that creek over a period of time was hard bottom. So every time that water hit a hard bottom, it swung and it carved out a creek channel. Come this way and it swung back this way and it carved out a creek channel that way. So these are hard bottom spots. And especially with walleye, I pay a lot of attention to hard bottom because that's where the fish are located at. Walleyes like hard bottom. They're there because the food's there. They may be there because they feel secure there, but they really relate to hard bottoms. Channel swings, bass fishermen might be sitting here watching this right now and say, yep, that's a pattern I wish you wouldn't have talked about, Tommy, because every time I find an outside channel swing in the spring on bull shoals, let's say, oftentimes I can catch bass there. So pay attention. Are you catching your fish on outside channel swings? Or you might be catching them on inside channel swings. Here we can see on this same creek, here's where this creek came down and it's flowing this way. And here's an inside channel swing. Oftentimes these inside channel swings are sand or mud. Might be a gradual flat right there, but here I've highlighted one. This is a little bit sharper one here. Here's another one. That's a inside channel swing, and so on and so forth. So here I've defined a multitude of them as we go down that, and there's a bunch more that I didn't draw out, but now we can define, maybe even further define it. Are they sharp channel swings to where you had kind of an underwater point sticking out right there? Or are they gradual channel swings to where this is still kind of an underwater point, but it's a little bit more tapering, or it's a little bit more flat? So that's kind of an inside turn or a flat on that channel swing. Those are two other terms that I didn't use that, there's all kinds of slang that people might be, you guys might be looking there, you girls might be looking there and looking at this map and saying, well, I call those turns, or I call those inside turns or outside turns. Well, again, it's another channel or structural element that you want to pay attention to when you're trying to define patterns. Flats. That's another thing that I'm going to look at. Am I catching my fish? Here's a picture of a bunch of flats on Grenada Lake down in Mississippi. Here you can see a flat here. Here you can see a flat here. Here's a flat here. Anywhere those contour lines, now the sharper the contour lines or the closer they are together, the steeper the break is, the steeper the hillside is, so to speak. The farther apart they are, this is more of a gradual break. Look at these right here. See how far apart these are right here, where I'm moving my thing to? Those are even more gradual. That's a big flat right there. To where here's a flat inside that break. But now all of a sudden, it starts to jump out at me saying, all right, if I caught my fish here, I might want to go check this gradual steep, or this gradual break, or this gradual flat over here. And then inside of this flat, let's say I'm catching them on a 12 to 13 foot flat right here. So maybe I might move over here and focus on this 12 to 13 foot contour line, or this 12 to 13 foot. What if I'm catching them over here on this color right here, this blue water? Well, I'm going to go and I'm going to try to duplicate that depth and that flat. Maybe up over here, I see another one. So now all of a sudden, you start to see where these blue colors have been the foundation of my career. And then when we start talking about when this map is put up on our mobile app and we can map that out in color, we've really got a great advantage there to where now it can jump out at you in living color and do that. Channel junctions. Here's another thing. Wherever two channels meet, maybe where a creek channel comes in and meets another creek channel, maybe it's where two river channels. Here on Grenada, this is the Yallabusha over here on the bottom arm here, or we call it, the right arm that goes from east to west. So this is the Yallabusha, and here's the Schooner. And is where those two rivers meet is right down here. So there's a junction. Here's a junction where the main river channels are meeting a secondary creek channel over here. Here's where a creek channel's flowing in and meeting with this river channel over here. So wherever I've circled those, now all of a sudden you can see all these creek channel junctions or these river channel junctions. And then look at these. I've got these question marks here. What are these? Well, the more I look at it, the more that looks like an oxbow. So, you know, everybody that's been on, say, the Mississippi River goes back and sees a little curved or a bow-shaped pond, which is an oxbow, where that river used to come in and then flow around on an arc. Then all of a sudden it might have broke through and started going this way, and an old oxbow was formed. Here's an underwater oxbow, to where maybe those fish might be relating to oxbows off of the main river channel. And you know I'm covering a lot here, but this is the reason that I just wanted to talk about mapping in this seminar, because there's a lot of data to be absorbed here. And you know, so now all of a sudden we're looking at an oxbow pattern. And my mind just does cartwheels. I get excited every time I start to look at this and start to define a pattern, because the more you can define a pattern, especially with your mapping, or most importantly with your mapping, the more successful you're going to be. What if I roll up to a body of water and somebody says they're on points? And I'm looking here, and here's a point. Here's a point. Now I'm going to point out the points, pardon the pun. I'm going to point out the points that you can see here by looking at land. This one's going to be real obvious. This one sticks out into the reservoir. Here's one that if you got on either side of it, it'd be fairly obvious. Sticks out in the reservoir. Here's one that sticks out. Well, all of a sudden I find out the fish are in, say, 18 foot of water on underwater points. Well, now all of a sudden, here's an underwater point. Here's an underwater point. And I haven't pointed out every point on this map, but if you look at these arrows here, those are showing you underwater points. Here's a couple over here. Well, what about underwater points, excuse me, where they meet 18 foot of water? Now we've defined the pattern even better. We've taken points, which is a structural element. We've added the hot depth to that. That's a secondary element. Excuse me. They may be wind-blown points. So in the summertime, we get a lot of south winds. We got a south wind that day. I'm going to probably pay attention to these underwater points. We get the wind the next day going this way. And, you know, now I'm talking about maybe fishing for wind-driven fish. If I'm looking for underwater points that may be holding crappies on Grenada, and the wind's blowing out of the salt, I'll go to the exact opposite side of that reservoir. Crappie fishing seems to be done best on flatter, calmer waters. So if I'm looking for crappies on underwater points, I'm going to go to the side where the wind's blowing from. And, you know, I'm doing my homework. Let's say I'm back in the motel room that night, and I'm looking over where I'm going to fish the next day. And I want to get out of the wind to fish for crappies. And they've scheduled that wind is going to go from the south, and it's going to swing around to the north. Well, I might pay attention to these points the next day. In fact, I'm more than likely am gonna. And I start to develop a game plan based on different winds. Here's points I may pay attention to with a south wind. Here's points I may pay attention to when it's a north wind. Here's a point I can fish with an east wind, a north wind, or a west wind. Those fish may come from one side of the point, swing around to the other side of the point. But you get my drift, to where I can look at my chart on my graph when I get back to the hotel room. And even better, now with the chart viewer that we've got on Navionics website, you can ramp up your computer. You can go down and look at the hotel's computer if they've got one. You can borrow your buddies, or you can get out your web app on your mobile device, and we can start planning for the next day. How about an early warm water pattern? Early in the year, when the water's starting to warm up in the spring, a lot of fish are going to relate to warmer water. They spawn in it, they feed in it. The warmer that water is, the shallower those fish sometimes go. Well, where are we going to find warm water in the spring? I look a lot for those exposures, those northern banks that get exposure to that southern wind and southern sun that actually warms up that water before it warms up these northern exposures. Cold water may all be down here on this side of the reservoir. Warm water may be up here. These fish may fire before these fish, but I'm going to look for an early warm water pattern. Another warm water pattern to pay attention to is maybe where rivers or creeks flow in. These fish may be staging at the mouth of creek arms to spawn. They may be there because there's warmer water there. You know, there may be deep water with access to shallow water. So when it warms up, they move into spawn or feed. And then when it cools down, they move out to deeper water. But good to pay attention to this. And here I've circled new body of water. It's going to be in the springtime of the year. I'm going to go there. I'm going to hit this one. I'm going to hit this one. I'm going to hit this one. And of course, here's another one. Here's another one. Now, here's something else to pay attention to that you can tell by looking at your Navionics cartography or your mapping. Here's one that's got a little inlet flowing into it. These might be drains, to where the only reason that these creek arms are here, or the only thing that established those was just where this drained into here. But look at this one over here. See how it's longer and squiggly? To me, that looks like that could be a creek or a river that flows all the time. So let's say you've had a rain and you got dirty water coming in here. I might want to pay attention to that because dirty water warms faster from the sun. Or I might want to pay attention to it. Dirty water means lower visibility. Walleyes like that, but maybe the crappies don't. And so on and so forth. So you can look at your map and you can start to learn structural elements by reading what type of creek flows in there, so on and so forth. Here's a little dude right here that looks like no drain. That might just be a cove. That may not be a creek channel or a little creek arm, but you know, that's another one that gives it away. And you know, as we start to look at this, you know, we start combining marking fish, we start combining our mapping with this. I keep thinking every time I go fishing that I'm just a touch away from the mega school. A couple of years ago, when we first won the Masters Walleye Circuit on Cass Lake, we started looking for perch because we wanted to go perch fishing. And I also realized that wherever we were marking perch, we might find walleye. So it was a good excuse to go out and beat up on the perch. What we call perch up north is actually real perch. They're yellow perch or ring perch, as some guys may call them. But here we could look at this. This could be a school of perch. Now here's what it looks like on 2D sonar. Here's what it looks like on down vision. But I'm going to drive around. I'm going to do sonar logging while I'm driving around. And I'm also going to mark fish while I'm driving around. And in turn look at how big that school is. Now this, of course, is a different photo, but just for comparison, this could be a school of crappie. This could be a school of bait fish that bass are relating to or walleyes are relating to, but there's that school of fish there. School's that big. I'm going to drive across there. Right here's where I mark that fish. I'm going to turn around, come back and fish these fish, but now I've already set up a pattern. They're up on this shallow hump, the shallow ridge right here. And that's another pattern that Tom Branch and I were talking about before this seminar started, is that, you know, maybe the only game in town might be humps. So you can shade your mapping out to all the humps in a lake. And that might be where every single fish is on that hump, where here we found perch up on this hump. And that, when we found these perch, this was a rock hump and they were feeding on crayfish. So that's why they were up there. But just by looking at my depth, if I find perch over here, I'm going to come over here. Here's a big flat. Wherever I find perch or mark fish on there, maybe they're over here. This is that same depth, that same contour. And now all of a sudden that's starting to jump out at me in living color. They're in this depth. I'm going to go here. I'm going to go over here. And I'm going to find more fish. And lo and behold, we were out on that lake that day and we literally filled the live well full of our limited jumbo perch. And of course, it's a forage fish. We didn't feel too bad about having to keep those. And we did the release to the grease on the perch. But that was all about marking them and catching them. And so I know this was very little bit about fish pictures. It was more about structural elements and contours. But I almost feel like now that I've done the seminar, that it's too much data. But on the other hand, I feel like we're just kind of hitting the tip of the iceberg on figure out what your pattern is, and you're going to be more successful whenever you're fishing. And the biggest thing to remember is that fish aren't tough to find once you know what you're looking for. And if you've got the right mapping, Navionics to me is the best mapping in the world, you're going to definitely know what you're looking for the next time you go out fishing. So I would just want to thank you all for stopping in. And now I want to ask if there's any questions out there. I guess, Tom, we're going to answer some questions, and we'll bring Tom back in and see what's going on.
Yep, sounds like a plan. Anybody got any questions, you can type them in on the side of your GoToWebinar, and we'll answer some of the questions of Tommy. If you're attending our webinar, just to give you an update, I was looking while you were talking, December the 11th, 8 o'clock, how to attract fish to you on the ice with Navionics Pro Angler Mark Martin. And then on December 13th, cruising the Bahamas and the Caribbeans with Jessica Graham. And that's probably where I'd like to be, as cold as it is in Atlanta. So we'll start the question and answer thing and see what we got here. This is from Kathy, and she wants to know, how did you do that advanced mapping stuff with the color shading?
How did I do the advanced mapping stuff?
Yeah, with the color shading. I think she might be talking about the app.
Yes, she's talking about the app. Now, if she's talking about color shading, on every unit, and I know especially on my Raymarine unit, that I can shade the deep water, I can shade the shallow water, and I can move that line around on my Raymarine. On the app, we actually had a photo there. I'm going to see if I can escape out of my screen view here, and then I'll go back to the beginning of the seminar, and I'll just bring up that slide so we can kind of take a look at that. Here we've got the app right here, and basically that's pretty simple. You just go over here in the menu, the advanced map options, and it's got fishing ranges on sonar chart. See here that I've got that turned on, and then here I've got shallow from 0 to 5 foot. I haven't played with this a lot, but I'm getting to know just enough to be dangerous. And what I can do is I can actually adjust my depths. Correct me if I'm wrong here, Tom, because I know you've played with this a lot more than I have.
Yeah. No, you're
but
right.
I can adjust my depths just by hitting this little arrow over here and moving that depth around.
Yeah, you can change the depth. You can change the colors. You can name it if you wanted to name the danger areas, or you wanted to name crappie, bass, whatever. We were talking about earlier about talking about humps, but if you're looking for, 0 to 5 feet and you really want it to jump out, like on my app, I made it pink so you could really see it, and even when you're out in the sunshine. So the app is incredible. First 2 weeks, the cool thing about the Navionics app, if you don't have it, you can get it at the Apple iTunes store, or you can go to the Google store. You can download the Navionics Boating US or US and Canada app. The first 2 weeks are free, so you can play with all the stuff you want to. And then if you want to renew your subscription after 2 weeks, it's $9.99 for the year. And I would recommend getting it now, because there probably will be a price increase the first of the year. We got some changes coming to the app, so that'll be exciting to announce later on in the month. So just a great, me and you were talking about this morning, and I shared with some other people. I'm hearing a lot of pro anglers telling me how important the app is, either on the phone or on the iPad. And now people are buying ram mounts and mounting the app actually on their boat. So you can buy like a life-proof, I carry the life-proof case that's waterproof. You can mount, your phone or your tablet in a life-proof case, or some other waterproof cases. There's probably a couple other ones out there. And you can use your tablet on the boat. That's pretty awesome feature to have.
Yeah, and that's something that I just did. And the more I look at this, the more I'm thinking to myself, the more dangerous I'm going to get and what a benefit this is to anglers. And think about this. We used to go fish a tournament, and I'm wild. I carry spare units, electronic units in the boat, just in case something would happen. And I tell you, I've had tornadoes land trees on my boat overnight. I've had people get in and steal units. I've had electrical surges that were unprotected. You name it. I had one year I had a unit break off my boat because I was going across rough water. Now this was back in the day, and it went into the water and sank.
Wow.
Nowadays, when you've got my partner's cell phone with a mobile app on it, I've got my cell phone with a mobile app on it, and I've got a tablet in the boat. We've got 3 backup mapping units in the boat.
Oh yeah.
And when you figure out that you can Wi-Fi them with a lot of units with sonar involved, now you've got look at all the possibilities there. So this is something that's really huge, and for $15, $20 for an app right now, you pretty much can get it all with that app, and you don't have to break the bank, but it's what I like is I really like it on the unit, and so when I store a coordinate, I'm ready to rock and roll. I'm good to go. I also like it on the app, and like I said, I can get in somebody else's boat, and every time I get in their boat, every time I've got a better app or better map than what they've got with Navionics.
All right. Hey, we got another question, and this might be out of me and both of our realms here. It says, my Garmin Fish Finder has a good map on it. Would Navionics mapping still be beneficial? I don't know if that's a trick question from Ken or not.
Well, I'm gonna tell you what, I always tell the truth, even at the risk that it could fire me. And my thought would be is, with Navionics, I have seen a lot of instances to where it's awesome to have that Navionics map, no matter what map you have. And I can tell when I'm at a tournament, when the competitor's map, and this happens a lot, when the competitor's map isn't quite up to snuff with Navionics, I got the whole field coming up to me trying to bum a chip off of me. Dude, I told you should have bought that chip last year when we were here. I know, but I figured that maybe, and that's another reason why not to, Tom pointed out a reason why not, don't wait for the new app. One reason right now is it's cheaper. Another reason that there's no reason to wait for Navionics cartography is you get updates. We do 2,000 of them a day. So instead of waiting until, I heard a new map was going to come out for my lake. Well, if it comes out for up to 1 year, you can get the new map put on your unit. We don't wait. Navionics puts them out constantly. So I guess to originally answer that question, the more mapping you can have, the better off you're going to be. And the best mapping I found is Navionics.
Yeah, Ken, we have a lot of people already know this. We were purchased by Garmin back in October of last year. The first map will be out February 2019. That's a combination Garmin Navionics map. It's called the G3, and those should become available in February. And that's Garmin cartography and Navionics combined together to work only in Garmin units. So, but you can go to Garmin.com and read more about that too if you want to. Just good people to work for. What's your strategy scouting maps on a river such as the Mississippi when conditions are always changing? And that's from Tom.
Well, I tell you what I oftentimes am going to want to do is I'm going to want to pay attention to, my computer's acting squirrely here. Tom, one thing to pay attention to on a river is if the water's rising or if the water's dropping, like say it's rising, those fish might move shallower. As a rule of thumb, as the water's rising, they will move shallower. As a rule of thumb, as the water's dropping, the fish will move deeper. So that's one thing to pay attention to, and I'll try to prepare for that. But we got to be careful when we say this is what's going to happen, because the fish will prove you a liar. They prove me a liar every time I'll stand there and say this is exactly what's going to happen. But that's one way to prepare for it. Another way to prepare for changing river conditions is if the wind's going to be blowing upstream on Saturday, then it's going to be blowing downstream on Sunday. The current's probably more than likely going to pick up, speed up. So you might want to pay attention more to areas out of the current on Sunday versus areas that were just had a gradual current flow on a river. Realizing that current is a structural element in rivers. It's also a structural element in lakes and reservoirs. So just paying attention to the current, keeping an open mind. A lot of times you got to go out every day and just reestablish a pattern or reestablish the hot depth. And so that's a big thing, to keep an open mind. If you caught them in 16 foot of water on Saturday and you go into 16 foot of water Sunday morning and fish it for about an hour and they gone, well, you might want to go shallower or deeper. The fish may not move up or downstream 25, 30, 40, 50 yards, but they may move 1 or 2 or 3 foot. And you reestablish that depth pattern that second day, and boom, you're back on them again. And then you can expound on your spots and your pattern.
Yeah. I love this question from Tim. It says, how did you discipline yourself to find fish first and actually fish later? That's a great question.
I got tired of losing to people that were finding fish first instead of later, or finding fish first before they fished instead of just fishing. And that's, I talked about trolling. Trolling's a way where you can fish and look for fish. Now you may only be able to do it at a mile to 2 miles an hour, 3 miles an hour. And sometimes, like, especially for walleye, we troll really fast. Crappie, I got it stuck in my head years ago to go 0.7 to 1.5 when trolling crankbaits. And then I get back to the boat ramp and I run into somebody that whaled on them going 2.5 miles per hour. So, you just have to say to yourself, I'm going to go out and I'm going to mark fish first, then I'm going to fish it. And hopefully you got enough time to do that.
Yeah. Is there any certain way to color certain types of structure rather than contour shading?
Well, again, we're going back to patterns. So what's interesting is all of a sudden you start finding the sand to mud transition, and that's usually pretty consistent throughout the body of water. Right now we shade depth. I don't know of any mapping or sonar option to where they let you customize it past that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd love to be able to color in weeds, but again, one thing to remember: catching fish in weeds in 8 foot of water, go look in other 8 foot depths. And oftentimes, if you're catching them in cabbage in 8 foot of water on a northern exposure close to deep water, now you're starting to put together the pieces of that pattern. You're bringing together all those elements, and you're clearly defining an intricate pattern.
Yeah, the other thing I was going to say with it is just being able to mark waypoints on your app or on your plotter. That will help you also. Just being able to, if you find grass, start marking it as a waypoint. That'd be a good idea.
Yeah, drive along and mark a waypoint, and then when you hit the grass, and then as soon as you get on the other side of grass, you hit a waypoint, and now you're doing the edges. When we didn't have mapping and we didn't have Sonar Chart Live and we didn't have sonar logs, oftentimes that's where we define a channel or we define structural elements like you're talking. So that's a great point, Tom.
Yeah. So in the spring, let's see, Brian says he catches walleye at night when they are up on the shad. He says, where do they go during the day? Do they just follow the shad out deeper?
You might have a school of fish that feeds on those shad at night, and then they move out and they sit in deep water and they rest, they sleep all day long. Now, I've seen that happen. I've seen walleyes sitting in shallow water, 4 or 5 foot of water, crystal clear water, and you drag a leech in front of that walleye, and that leech is sitting there swimming against that fish's beak, and the walleye takes off. And it's like, dude, are you kidding me? You come put something I desire to eat in front of my face, I'm more than likely going to eat it. But he's sleeping. So I found him in his bedroom, and then I got to thinking about it. Let's say I went to the Chinese buffet and I loaded up on food. Let's say they had all you could eat sushi, and it was good sushi, which all you can eat sushi is kind of an oxymoron when they say good sushi. But let's say I get stuffed with it, and I go back and I go to bed, and if somebody wakes me up in the middle of the night by poking me in the nose with a rot gut pizza gas station sushi, I'm more than likely going to get up and run. So, look for those fish. You might want you got to always look for the fish when they're in the dining room, unless you can wake them up and make them eat. They seem to be a lot better. So those shad, that's the dining room. And if you figure out that question, get a hold of me. Hit me up on messaging on Facebook and tell me what you figured out, because I don't have all the answers, but that's one of them.
Yeah. Are the features, this one's from Fred. He wants to know if the features are the same on the Lowrance unit compared to the mobile app. And that is a no. And I'll answer that for us. The mobile app is a whole separate feature. It is something Navionics has patented information on. The color shading, I think you can do it on Lowrance and Garmin and Humminbird now, but it's a little, I tell people all the time, I think the app has more detailed mapping than most of the other mapping that's out there, other than our chips, because that's where it comes from. So, this is from Ken. He said, did you say the US and Canada map is $9.99 per year? I think you must be talking about the app. Yeah, I think it is. I'll check while we're talking again, but it should be called Boating US and Canada. Should be $9.95. Yeah, should be $9.95 on your iPhone or Android tablet. I mean, your phone. Tablet's like $54.
I haven't bought one in a while, Tom.
Yeah, I know. So, hey, last question for the night. We're kind of getting in time-wise here. What's the best way to catch walleyes on pressured lakes? And that comes from Corey.
What's the best way to catch walleyes on pressured lakes?
Mm-hmm.
You got to go really slow with a live bait presentation that they really, really want to eat. They really desire. Say like creek chubs up on the northern Minnesota lakes, or leeches on slip bobbers on those same bodies of water or other bodies of water, or go the exact opposite. Go really fast, really big baits, and make them eat it. Turn them on. But that's a tough question, because I have to try to do that for a living all the time, Corey, and I can only take so many guesses at it until I got to go back to tonight. But the biggest thing is figuring out where they're at and figuring out that pattern, as far as the depth pattern, bottom content, the structural elements, the wind, the current, and then putting baits in front of them. If you're not fishing in front of fish, it doesn't matter what you put in the water. Of course, you're not going to catch them.
Yeah. Don't see them on the plotter. You don't even have a chance of catching them. So, hey, Tommy, thank you tonight for this webinar. This has been great. I just enjoy working with you, and I think it's mutual for both of us. Just a great information session, something that really needed, because it breaks down just pattern fishing in general for everybody. I mean, walleye, crappie, bass, we talked about it all tonight. And I think it's just, it's been really informative, and I appreciate your time, and you and your family have a Merry Christmas. This webinar will be available on YouTube in the next coming days, and I'll make sure we post it out on Facebook. If we didn't get to your question tonight and you still have a question, please email me. My email address is just tbranch@navionics.com, and I'll try to answer it. And if I can't answer it, I'll get Tommy to answer it for you. And just appreciate your time. Anything else you got to say, bud?
I just want to thank everybody for tuning in. And if you've got any questions and don't want to email them to Tom, want to Facebook them to me, whatever the case may be, I try to answer every question that I get. It may take me a while to get to you on Facebook or Instagram, but pretty accessible and pretty easy to find. And if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be doing this for a living. So if you like something, tell your friends. If you don't like it, tell me and I'll fix it for you.
Thanks, buddy. Merry Christmas to you and your family. We'll see you real soon.
You too, Tom. Merry Christmas.